The state is dropping the ball for local mental health patients.
An Action News Jax investigation uncovered that people who have been involuntarily committed are not getting the hearings they're entitled to by law, hearings that could set them free. Action News Jax Jenna Bourne joins us live in San Souci. And Jenna, you uncovered a glaring discrepancy, and now you're asking what the state is doing about it.
Since my investigation into River Point Behavioral Health and Wekiva Springs Center began 2 months ago, I've heard from dozens of patients who say they were held longer than medically necessary so that these businesses could milk their insurance. Now I've learned Florida's court system is failing to provide the checks and balances required by law to prevent that from happening.
It's me going against a corporation, and who's going to believe me?
U.S. Marine Corps veteran Steve Smith made a comment to his fiancée 2 years ago that worried her.
Were you suicidal?
No, not at all.
Smith was involuntarily committed to mental hospital River Point Behavioral Health under Florida's Baker Act. His psychiatric evaluation says Smith denied being suicidal, but you can see the notes call his potential for suicide, homicide, or violence moderate. River Point kept Smith for 9 days.
They bring people in, that didn't have insurance, and they'd be gone within 2 or 3 days. But people that had insurance, they were there longer.
I heard a similar story from this woman who once held elected office in our area.
There was a woman in the bed next to me that had been there for some time. She says, "You must have good insurance." And I said, "Why? Why do you say that?" She says, "Let's see how long you stay, because if you've got insurance, you're going to be in here for a while." And I said, "Oh, God, no, please, please, no."
By Florida law, if a patient's involuntary commitment is extended beyond 72 hours, they're entitled to a hearing within 5 days. But that's not happening. By analyzing court records, I found the average wait for a patient who's being held is 58 days. And that's only for people who got a hearing. In 2015, less than 1% of patients got a hearing at all. River Point, Wekiva Springs, and their parent company, Universal Health Services, have been under federal investigation since 2013. Medicare and Medicaid payments were suspended a year later. I've tried repeatedly to get River Point and Wekiva to give me their sides of the story.
I was told yesterday someone at River Point was going to get back to me, but nobody did.
Hospitals, River Point and Wekiva.
But you're owned by the same company.
River Point sent me a statement which reads in part, "We have always worked to comply with all laws and regulations, including appropriate Baker Act procedures. We deny and dispute any assertions to the contrary."
We need to have more hearings.
Jeff Davenport took over mental health cases at the state attorney's office last year. Since then, the number of hearings tripled to 2.2%, still far below what the law requires.
But doesn't it also potentially allow room for people who don't need to be kept longer to wind up being kept if they don't get a hearing within those 5 days?
I think that's definitely a concern.
To deal with the problems, the state attorney's office issued this administrative order streamlining the process, requiring all facility to file petitions to keep patients longer electronically. There's also video conferencing for hearings. 5 former patients are now suing River Point and Wekiva Springs. Reporting live in San Souci, Jenna Bourne, CBS 47, Action News Jax.
A plan to protect local mental health patients may be in jeopardy. It comes a day after an Action News Jax investigation revealed local patients are not getting the hearings they're entitled to by law. Action News Jax Jenna Bourne is live in the newsroom now. And Jenna, the Florida Supreme Court just made a decision that could eventually impact the local solution to the problem.
The state Supreme Court put this temporary ban on video hearings for patients who have been involuntarily committed to a mental institution. It left our local state attorney's office scrambling today to figure out what it means for them.
That is the check and the balance, really.
Assistant State Attorney Jeff Davenport says hearings are the key to prevent patients from unnecessarily being held against their will in a mental institution. Patients are entitled to a hearing within 5 days if a mental health facility wants to extend their involuntary commitment beyond the 72 hours allowed by Florida's Baker Act. I told you Tuesday that by analyzing court records, I found that in 2015, less than 1% of those patients got a hearing at all. Last year, it tripled to 2.2%.
If they aren't getting these hearings within those 5 days, how can we be sure that that isn't happening to them? How can we be sure that they're not being held unnecessarily when they don't need to be?
I would say that there's It's a good question. It's a complicated question.
To fix that problem, our state attorney's office recently implemented video conferencing for hearings, which are cheaper, faster, and easier than courtroom hearings. But now a possible snag. The state Supreme Court put a temporary ban on video hearings in Lee County until the court makes a ruling about whether they are constitutional. Opponents of the video hearings say they're not as effective and they're discriminatory, as the mentally ill are the only ones required to do video hearings in Lee County. Within the hour, our local state attorney's office has confirmed that the Supreme Court's temporary ban does not affect us, only Lee County. But if the Supreme Court ultimately decides the video conferences are unconstitutional, the local program will have to go away. Reporting live in the newsroom, Jenna Bourne, CBS 47, Fox 30, Action News Jax.
A new development tonight in an Action News Jax investigation. We are pushing for answers after we uncovered that DCF has known for years that a local mental institution was failing to file court documents meant to protect patients' rights. Action News Jax investigator Jenna Bourne joins us live. And Jenna, you went through hundreds of pages of documents trying to get to the truth.
I found that the Department of Children and Families has investigated River Point Behavioral Health 7 times since 2011, but the facility has never faced penalties as a result of those investigations. 377 pages. These are 6 years of Department of Children and Families investigations into River Point Behavioral Health. Buried in these documents, I made a surprising find. DCF confirmed multiple times through its own investigations that River Point Behavioral Health had kept some patients against their will longer than the 72 hours allowed by Florida's Baker Act, but failed to file the legally required court petitions to keep them that long. Those petitions require a hearing within 5 days, crucial checks and balances to prevent you from being locked in a mental institution unnecessarily.
That's what the mechanism to make sure that they either released or that they go get the treatment that they need.
Despite repeated complaints, DCF reported it found no evidence of a systemic issue with River Point's Baker Act processes. Over the past 2 months, I've heard from dozens of former patients who say River Point held them against their will in order to collect thousands in insurance payments.
Somebody in some office somewhere forgets that, there's lives that hang in the balance.
When I originally confronted DCF's local spokesman, he denied that my findings existed. When I sent him specific page numbers and quotes proving my findings, he declined my request for an on-camera interview. So I showed up in person to get answers.
So John Harrell is not going to come out and talk to me? Okay, can you please remind John Harrell that journalism is not reciting the written statements that he emails me? Journalism is asking questions and getting answers.
A federal investigation into River Point, its sister facility, Wekiva Springs Center, and their parent company, Universal Health Services, has been going on for years. A source close to that investigation calls it the never-ending story. Reporting live in San Souci, Jenna Bourne, CBS 47, Fox 30, Action News Jax.
The statement that DCF sent us and says in part, the River Point facility receives roughly 1,300 Baker Act patients a year. With each case where we determined that changes needed to be made, we directed River Point to make those changes. To read more of DCF's statements, head to Jenna's story on our website and mobile app.